Hello, welcome to this first main video in the series Is the Bible Reliable? You'll find the links to the introductory video and the other videos directly underneath this on YouTube. Thanks very much for tuning in. As you know, if you watched the introductory video, there are four main parts of this. In this video, we look at the case against the Bible. Then in other videos, we look at the evidence from the Bible itself, from the manuscripts and the process of translating and passing on the Bible down the generations, and from history and archaeology. And I believe that all those things go together to give us the firm conclusion that we can trust the Bible, that it's a reliable document. What is the Bible itself? Well, we see it as one book, but actually it's 66, 39 books in the Old Testament, 27 in the New, and a whole range of different types of literature. There's poems, there's prophecy, there's psalms, there's lists, there's laws, there's letters, there's biography, there's love poetry. There's a whole range of different material in the Bible. But what the Bible claims to be is that it's the story of God's dealings with the whole of creation and with his people. And it's God speaking to us. It's God's revelation of himself. You can tell a certain amount by a person about how they look, how they dress, their house, the state of their workspace. You can tell a certain amount just by looking at those things, but actually you only really know the person when they speak and when they reveal themselves to you. And the Bible's consistent claim is that it's revelation. It is God speaking to us through word, through poems, through songs, through stories, and fully and finally through Jesus, God coming in person, and the Bible's testimony to that arrival on the earth. That's how the Bible presents itself. It presents itself as true and authoritative revelation about God. That's how Jesus treats the Bible when he quotes it. That's how the early church sees the Bible as well. The story of God's dealings with his people, revelation about who God is, about who we are, about why the world is the way it is, and how God is planning to redeem all of that. That's what the Bible claims about itself, but there are all sorts of charges levelled against the Bible. That it's full of contradictions, that it was made up, that Jesus is a myth anyway, that the early church altered all sorts of bits of it, that it's inconsistent with each other, that it tells of stuff that can't possibly have happened, miracles, resurrections, and all that sort of thing. Some of the stories are scientifically wrong or historically inaccurate or just too ridiculous to take seriously. Or that the Bible is just too culturally remote for us to understand it, that being written between 2,000 and 3,500 years ago in different languages in a different culture, how can a document from those times and places possibly have anything to say to us in the 21st century in Western civilization? Here's what some of the Bible's critics have had to say about it. This PowerPoint works. Here we go. So Richard Dawkins. This is in the God Delusion, I believe. And Richard Dawkins says, to be fair, much of the Bible is not systematically evil, but just plain weird, as you'd expect of a chaotically cobbled together anthology of disjointed documents, composed, revised, translated, distorted, and improved by hundreds of anonymous authors, editors, and copyists, unknown to us, and mostly unknown to each other, spanning 9 centuries. So Dawkins' point is that the Bible is incoherent, it doesn't really tell a coherent story, and there's been so much change to it that even if there was something there, it's been lost in the process. Bertrand Russell, one of the most celebrated secular philosophers of the 20th century, wrote this: historically, it's quite doubtful whether Christ ever existed at all, and if he did, we don't know anything about him. So making two claims. Firstly, that the Bible itself is made up. It's not actually telling us about stuff that actually happened, and where it does tell us stuff about what actually happened, it's been changed so much that we don't actually get back to the original events. We can't actually know anything about Jesus. Ian Paul, who's a New Testament scholar, writes this: there's a persistent feature of Western culture known as the Jesus myth, which in turn is one kind of conspiracy theory, and like others doesn't stand up to scrutiny. So more popular versions of Russell's claim, like this one from the Mail Online: ancient Bible scholar claims ancient confessions prove story of Jesus Christ was entirely fabricated by Roman aristocrats. Every few years, usually just in time for Christmas, one of these stories comes up that somebody has disproved Christianity, that it turns out to be all a fake, that we've all been taken in, and the truth has been suppressed somewhere by the church along the line. We have a culture that is sadly easily taken in by conspiracy theories, by the idea that there's some power somewhere that suppressed the truth, whether it's about Donald Trump's election victory, this dates the video, vaccinations, about whatever it is. We just have a susceptibility to these things. Here's another one. Jesus never existed, says the Mail Online. Strange how these stories get reported by the Daily Mail. Writer finds no mention of Christ in 126 historical texts and says he was a mythical character. Well, of course, if you took 126 texts from the cookery section of the local library, you'd be unlikely to find any mention of, say, electricity or the conflict in Syria. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, it just means you're looking in the wrong place. There are loads and loads of historical documents that talk about Jesus. But Ehrman, who was a Christian, is now an atheist, agnostic, and certainly a critic of the Bible, writes this, that Jesus certainly existed. As virtually every competent scholar of antiquity, Christian or non-Christian, agrees. So these conspiracy theories might appeal to a certain sort of mindset, but actually when you look at the evidence, as we'll see later in this series, it's very, very strong to back up not just that Jesus existed, but that the story the Bible tells about him is an accurate one. Peter Gurry, who's a textual scholar who examines in detail the manuscripts of the New Testament that we have, writes this: I think conspiracy theories appeal to people who distrust institutions. There's one reason why it's easier to write a bestseller about the story behind who changed the Bible and why, than it is to write one on why those same changes don't undermine the Christian faith. So, Bible proved wrong is a popular headline. Bible proved right. Have you ever seen that one? Even though there are loads and loads of archaeological discoveries that actually back that one up. The conspiracy theory has an appeal, so we hear about it, and because the message gets repeated, we start to assume that it's true. And that's not a correct assumption. Richard Burrich, another New Testament scholar. There are those who argue that Jesus is a figment of the church's imagination, that there never was a Jesus at all. I have to say that I do not know any respectable critical scholar who says that anymore. The consensus among academics, among people who've done their research, among people who've looked properly at the evidence, is that you can't say, well, Jesus never existed and it's all a fabrication. There definitely was a Jesus, and he definitely did something like what the Bible says about him. But maybe the case is not that it was all made up. Maybe the case is, well, there might have been something there originally, but it's been changed so much that it's been lost out of all recognition and out of all recovery. So here is Dan Brown, writer of the Da Vinci Code. One of his characters says this: the Bible didn't arrive by fax from heaven. The Bible is the product of man, my dear, not of God. The Bible didn't fall magically from the clouds. Man created it as a historical record of tumultuous times, and it's evolved through countless translations, additions, and revisions. History has never had a definitive version of the book. Again, because the claim is repeated that the Bible has been changed again and again over the centuries, people take it as true, but the claim is not true. And again, we'll see that as we go through. Newsweek did a big special on the Bible a few years ago. No television preacher has ever read the Bible, it said. Neither has any evangelical politician, neither has the Pope, neither have I, neither have you. At best, we all read a bad translation. Translation of translations of translations, of hand-copied copies of copies of copies of copies, and on, hundreds of times. Again, the point being made that if there was an original Bible narrative, it's been lost because of the process of transmitting it and passing it on over the years. Again, as we'll see, that's not a true claim. John Barton, this book, A History of the Bible, was recently serialized on Radio 4. In his book, A History of the Bible, writes, it's striking how forms of Christianity that still insist on first century period junk survive and flourish. Again, Barton's case is that most of what's in the New Testament was actually made up by the church. It doesn't actually accurately reflect Jesus, that the church made stuff up, got it into an authorized text, the Bible, and we've picked that up uncritically and carried on with it. As we'll see, again, there is very, very strong evidence that no such thing happened. Watch this space. All of this shows that there's a range of attitudes to the Bible. There's the attitude that the Bible's made up. It's not actually related to anything historical at all, that some people at one stage just kind of made up the events and stuck them all there in the book. There's the attitude that the Bible's been altered. Maybe there was an original message. Maybe there was something even divinely inspired, but it's been lost because of the process of copying and editing and translating, or because the church has suppressed the truth, the conspiracy theory thing, and so on. Or there's the attitude that the Bible is authentic, that it's a true record of what it speaks about, and it's a true revelation of God and who he is. If you think the Bible's made up, you're probably more likely to be an atheist or an agnostic. If you think it's been altered from within the Christian faith, there are a number of people who think that, and they would fall into the liberal camp. So they would tend to look at the Bible and say, well, we have a bit of a picture of what Jesus was like, but it's been changed, so we have to use our reason and our intellect and science and thinking to get behind that. Or Islam and the cults take a different approach. They say, well, the Bible's been altered, but God has shown us what it was supposed to say first time round. So Joseph Smith of the Mormons received the Book of Mormon through a pair of crystal spectacles and claims a new revelation that shows what the Bible should have said. Muhammad in Islam claimed the same. Direct dictation from God. Here is all the bits where we put the Bible right. So that's the altered party, but most Christians in most places for most of history treat the Bible as authentic. That it's true, it's reliable, it's a consistent picture, it's not been altered or changed by the church, that what it speaks about is what actually happened and what God actually meant to say to us. I wonder where you've been on that spectrum in the course of your life. I wonder where you are at the moment. Where along the line do you go? So those are the attitudes to the Bible. I just want to pick out the one in the middle, the one that's been altered. So there is a project among some Christians to say, okay, well we've got the Bible, and we do think it's inspired and it is a guide, but it's been changed. And so what we want to do is to get back behind the changes and get the original Jesus, the authentic Jesus, whose voice has kind of been covered over by all these changes over the years. So one writer, Joachim Jeremias, says it will be necessary to remove the sayings and parables from their setting in the life of the primitive church in order to hear the original tones. So the church has made up a few things, the church has tweaked the message of Jesus, but if we can strip that away, like paint stripper, then we will discover the original message of Jesus. And over the past 250 years or so, dozens and dozens and dozens of Western theologians and scholars have tried to do this, tried to scrape away the things they thought the church had put on. These miracles, well, we can't have that. Resurrection, well, that doesn't happen. All this stuff about the end of the world, well, that's not acceptable to modern ears. We scrape that off as well. And what happens when we've got rid of all of those barnacles? What happens when we've got rid of all the stuff the church added on? When we get back to the authentic Jesus? Well, what it looks like. Somebody made this wonderful analogy. They said these theologians, these scholars who are doing this work, look down the well of history to find Jesus, and they see their own face reflected back at them from the bottom. Because the version of Jesus that emerged from all these attempts to retell the story, the version of Jesus that these scholars ended up portraying, looked very much like them. Isn't it remarkable that the result of all of this study, the result of all of this stripping away of all the additions and changes over the years, ends up with a Jesus who looks very much like a white, Western, middle-class academic man. Isn't that odd? That people would find a Jesus who agrees with them on pretty much everything. And the results give themselves away. The people weren't actually looking for Jesus, they were looking for a reflection of themselves. They wanted to find a Jesus that backed up their version of history. And of course, again, all of this assumes that the documents have been changed over the years, not because the evidence says so, but because of what's actually in the documents themselves. People can't deal with miracles and resurrection and all that sort of thing, which of course, if God is there, is not a problem at all. C.S. Lewis had a look at all of these efforts to recreate Jesus from history, and he wrote this. He'd seen lots of reviews of his work and people trying to reconstruct why he'd written certain things, to try and sort of give their insight into why would C.S. Lewis write a story about this? Why would he say that? And Lewis said, I've watched with some care imaginary histories, both of my own books and books by friends. Reviewers, both friendly and hostile, will tell you what public events had directed the author's mind, what other authors had influenced him, what his overall intention was, what sort of audience he principally addressed, why and when he did everything. My impression is that in the whole of my experience, not one of these guesses has on any one point been right. The method shows a record of 100% failure. Isn't that fascinating? That Lewis, his critics and people analysing his writings from England, contemporaries of his, some of them knew him personally, they're from the same culture, they spoke the same language, they were surrounded by the same events in history within the UK and the world. And when they tried to reconstruct what C.S. Lewis really meant, they failed. Lewis goes on to say, in all of these attempts to reconstruct his thinking, I can't remember a single hit. And if that's the record with someone who's a contemporary, with someone you have every chance of being able to work out, why did he say this? What did he really mean? If that's how difficult it is to do it with somebody now who we know, then the chances of us getting it right, doing it with Jesus, separated us from us by 2,000 years of history, by several thousand miles, by language and culture, the chances that a Western academic might be able to work out what Jesus really meant to say, well, forget it. So that leaves us with various options. If the Bible is made up, then treat it as a work of fiction. Treat it like Shakespeare or something like that. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, take it down the charity shop. Or you might see it, well, it's that there is something inspired in here, but it's been changed. We put it on the bookshelf next to the sayings of the Dalai Lama or the collected poems of Byron or anything else that stirs us up a bit, makes us feel inspired, but it isn't actually an authentic guide to life. Or we go with the cults that say, oh, well, we found the real message and it's in the Book of Mormon or it's in the Quran or something like that. Or we go with what Christians have concluded through most of history is that this is true in what it claims, it's accurate in what it depicts historically and geographically, it's accurate in what it records of the life and death and resurrection and the sayings and deeds of Jesus, and it's a book that we can treat as authoritative and as the words of God. And I think we can do that because there's actually plenty of evidence for the reliability of the Bible. We've looked a bit at what the critics say, and in the other videos in the series, we'll look at some of the evidence for why the Bible is trustworthy. So I do hope you'll watch those. Thanks very much for watching.